The afternoon sun filtered through the smudged windows of Sweetie's bakery as Diane Miller stood at the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I need to cancel the birthday cake order for Saturday." Her fingers trembled as she clutched her purse, knuckles whitening with the effort of holding herself together. The bakery, with its warm scents of vanilla and cinnamon, had always been a place of joy for Diane, but today it felt like the sight of another defeat. Cancel? "But Ms. Miller, we've already started on the baseball design. Tommy's turning 8, right?" Nancy, the bakery owner, peered over her reading glasses with concern. She had known Diane since high school and had watched her struggle as a single mother since Tommy's father walked out 3 years ago. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Something came up with work and I just—" Diane's voice cracked. She couldn't bring herself to say that her hours had been cut at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, or that the choice had come down to the cake or the electricity bill. "I'll still pay the deposit. I know it's short notice." What neither woman noticed was the tall man in the corner booth, his attention caught by the quiet exchange. James Harrington had stopped at the small-town bakery on a whim, while his driver filled up the car at the gas station across the street. Dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he seemed out of place among the gingham curtains and faded linoleum. The tech billionaire was passing through on his way to a conference, his mind usually occupied with stock prices and acquisition deals. But something about the woman's posture, shoulders rounded forward as if bearing an invisible weight, made him listen more carefully. "Don't worry about the deposit, honey," Nancy said, reaching across the counter to squeeze Diane's hand. "You can use it another time. Is Tommy very disappointed?" "He doesn't know yet," Diane whispered, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I'll figure something out. Maybe cupcakes from the grocery store. I just hate to let him down again." James watched as she left the bakery, her head held high despite the obvious distress. Through the window he saw her climb into an aging sedan, sit motionless for a moment, then rest her forehead against the steering wheel. "Tough situation?" James asked casually as Nancy approached to refill his coffee. "Oh, you have no idea," Nancy sighed, glancing toward the door. "Diane works harder than anyone I know. 2 jobs, raising that sweet boy alone. Tommy's been talking about this birthday party for months. Baseball theme. He's crazy about it. Keeps saying this is the year the Red Sox scouts will discover him," she added with a sad smile. "Diane's been saving up, but life keeps throwing curveballs." James nodded, his coffee forgotten as he gazed out the window. At 42, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. His charitable foundation donated millions each year, but it had been ages since he'd connected with the human impact of financial struggle. The foundation staff handled the details. He just signed the checks. "What kind of cake was it going to be?" he asked suddenly. "Baseball field design. Green frosting for the grass, white for the bases. Tommy's name on the pitcher's mound." Nancy's eyes brightened. "I was going to make little fondant players too. That boy deserves something special." James pulled out his wallet. "I'd like to pay for the cake, and whatever else would make a great party." Nancy stared at him, recognition slowly dawning. "You're just someone who remembers what it's like to look forward to a birthday," he interrupted with a gentle smile. "My mother worked 3 jobs. There were years when a cake was a luxury we couldn't afford." Within minutes the plan expanded. Not just the cake, but a complete party at the local baseball field. James made calls while Nancy contacted Diane's best friend Kelly to coordinate. By the time he left the bakery, James had set aside his conference plans for the weekend. Something about this situation had stirred memories he'd long buried beneath spreadsheets and board meetings. 3 days later, Tommy Miller woke up on his 8th birthday, expecting little more than his mother's traditional pancake breakfast. The past few months had been full of disappointments. Baseball camp cancelled, their planned move to a better apartment delayed, his mother's increasingly exhausted smiles. He'd overheard enough to understand that money was tight, though the concept remained abstract to his young mind. "Ready for your birthday surprise?" Diane asked, her eyes sparkling in a way Tommy hadn't seen in months. "Pancakes?" he guessed, already grateful for the small tradition. "Better." "Get dressed, baseball gear today." Tommy's heart raced as they drove toward the town's baseball field. He spotted balloons tied to the fence and a small gathering of people. "Mom, what's happening?" Diane simply smiled, emotion making it impossible to speak. When they parked, Tommy recognized his friends from school, his little league teammates, and several adults from the neighborhood. "Surprise!" they shouted as he approached. The baseball field had been transformed. Her tent housed a table laden with food and drinks. Baseball-themed decorations hung everywhere. Tommy's friends rushed forward, baseball mitts already on their hands. "We're having your party at a real baseball field," Diane explained, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening to spill. Someone very kind wanted to make your birthday special." Tommy was speechless, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, especially the magnificent cake centerpiece, exactly like the one he'd described to his mother months ago while flipping through Nancy's cake catalogue. What Tommy didn't immediately notice was the tall man standing off to the side, watching with an unexpected lump in his throat. James Harrington had spent billions on business deals without blinking, but the pure joy on this child's face affected him in ways he couldn't articulate. The day unfolded with impromptu baseball games, presents, and food. Local coaches volunteered to run drills with the kids. A professional photographer captured moments that would become cherished memories. Through it all, James remained in the background, speaking briefly with Diane to explain his impulse at the bakery. "I can't possibly thank you enough," Diane said, watching Tommy run the bases with abandon, his face flushed with excitement. "You don't need to," James replied simply. "Sometimes life deals unfair hands. I've been fortunate enough to receive more than my share of good cards. It's only right to redistribute the deck occasionally." As the afternoon light began to fade and children reluctantly headed home, Tommy approached James, whom he'd been eyeing curiously throughout the day. "Mom says you're the reason we had this amazing party," Tommy said, looking up at the billionaire with unabashed directness. "She says you're like a baseball scout, but for people who need help." James crouched down to meet the boy at eye level. "Your mom is the real hero. I just pitched in for one day. She's batting for you every single day." Tommy considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can muster. Then, with the unpredictable impulse of childhood, he threw his arms around the billionaire's neck in a fierce hug. "This was the best day ever," he whispered. James froze, then carefully returned the embrace, something shifting in his chest, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even realized he'd built. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, none of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change all their lives. The story was just beginning. The Monday following Tommy's birthday celebration, James Harrington sat in his executive suite overlooking the Boston skyline, unable to focus on the quarterly reports his assistant had prepared. His mind kept drifting back to the baseball field, to Tommy's uninhibited joy and Diane's grateful tears. Something had awakened in him, a recognition of purpose beyond profit margins and technological innovations. "Mr. Harrington," his assistant Patricia appeared at the door. "Your 10 o'clock was cancelled, but there's something else that needs your attention." James nodded absently, still staring out the window. "Sir, are you all right? You've been distracted since you returned from your trip." James turned, regarding his efficient assistant of 7 years. Had he ever asked about her family, her aspirations beyond managing his calendar? "Patricia, do we have any programs that directly help working families? Not just donations to large charities, but something more personal?" Patricia blinked in surprise. "The foundation handles our philanthropic work, but it's mostly large grants to established organizations, nothing specifically targeting individual families that I'm aware of." "Let's change that," James said decisively. "Set up a meeting with the foundation team and find out if we have contacts at Mercy Hospital in Riverdale." Riverdale. That's nearly 2 hours from Boston. "I'm aware. It's important." What James couldn't explain, even to himself, was the persistent image of Diane's determined face as she'd tried to cancel that cake. There had been no self-pity, just quiet dignity in the face of impossible choices. It reminded him of his own mother, who had cleaned houses and waited tables to provide for him after his father's death, never complaining despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Meanwhile, in Riverdale, Diane was experiencing her own lingering effects from the birthday party. Tommy couldn't stop talking about Mr. James and the amazing day. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also stirred uncomfortable feelings. While deeply grateful for the stranger's kindness, Diane prided herself on self-reliance. Accepting such generosity from a billionaire, however well-intentioned, had left her feeling both grateful and somewhat diminished. "Mum, Can we send Mr. James a thank you card? I made this in art class. Tommy held up a construction paper creation covered in glitter and baseball stickers. Diane smiled, ruffling his hair. That's thoughtful, honey, but I'm not sure how to reach him, Ms. Nancy at the bakery might know. She talked to him a lot. The suggestion was reasonable, but Diane hesitated. The bakery had become a place of mixed emotions, the site of her humiliation and subsequent rescue. Later that week, Diane's supervisor at the hospital called her into the office. With her stomach in knots, Diane prepared for more bad news about reduced hours. "Diane, I've received a rather unusual request," Dr. Winters began, her expression unreadable. "The Harrington Foundation has approached the hospital about establishing a new nursing scholarship program. They specifically asked if we had staff interested in advancing their medical education." Diane stared blankly. "That's wonderful for the hospital, but the foundation representative mentioned you by name." The room seemed to tilt. "Me? There must be some mistake." "No mistake. Apparently, Mr. Harrington himself requested that you be informed of this opportunity, Doctor." Winters slid a folder across the desk. "Full tuition for an RN program, plus a stipend for living expenses. They're calling it the Second Chance Scholarship." Diane's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside was an official letter from the Harrington Foundation, along with program details that seemed tailored specifically to her situation, classes scheduled around her existing work hours, childcare assistance, mentoring support. The generosity was overwhelming, but also discomforting. Why her? I don't know what to say. "Say you'll apply," Dr. Winters encouraged. "You're one of our hardest workers, Diane. You deserve this chance." That evening, as Tommy completed his homework at the kitchen table of their small apartment, Diane paced, the scholarship papers spread before her. "What's wrong, Mom? You keep walking back and forth like Mrs. Peterson's cat when it's hungry." Diane smiled despite her turmoil. "Just thinking, buddy. About the papers. Is it bills again?" His young face grew serious, displaying an awareness no 8-year-old should have about financial struggles. "No, actually. It's something good, potentially, but complicated." Tommy nodded sagely. "Like when Coach says I have great potential but complicated mechanics." Diane laughed, the tension breaking momentarily. "Something like that." The next day, she found herself standing once again in Sweetie's bakery, this time with purpose rather than defeat. "Nancy, I need to ask you something about Mr. Harrington." Nancy smiled knowingly. "I was wondering when you'd come by. That man was quite taken with you and Tommy." Diane blushed. "Not like that. He's established a scholarship at the hospital, and somehow my name was specifically mentioned. It feels, I don't know, targeted. I'm grateful but also confused." Nancy wiped her hands on her apron. "He asked a lot of questions about you after you left that day. Not in a creepy way," she added hastily. "He seemed genuinely concerned, said something about seeing his own mother in you." "His mother?" "Apparently she raised him alone, worked multiple jobs. He said watching you reminded him of what she went through." This revelation shifted something in Diane's perspective. Not charity then, but empathy born of shared experience, despite the vast difference in their current circumstances. As Diane debated the scholarship offer over the following days, James was implementing broader changes inspired by his encounter with the Millers. The Harrington Foundation launched a new initiative focused on supporting working single parents, particularly those pursuing education in healthcare fields. The pilot program would begin in Riverdale before expanding nationally. 2 weeks after Tommy's birthday, Diane was startled by a knock at her apartment door. Opening it revealed Nancy from the bakery, holding a large envelope. "Special delivery," Nancy announced with a conspiratorial smile. "Someone dropped this off for you." Inside was a brief note on expensive stationery. "Mrs. Miller, I hope you'll consider the scholarship opportunity. It's not charity, it's investment in someone who clearly has the determination and heart that our healthcare system desperately needs. No strings attached, no obligations. Your decision entirely." Separately, Tommy left quite an impression on me. "Enclosed is a season pass for the Red Sox home games. My driver can arrange transportation for any games you wish to attend. Again, no obligations, simply an opportunity if you choose to accept it. With respect and admiration, James Harrington P.S. The baseball scout joke was the best I've heard in years. Diane sat heavily on the sofa, the note in one hand and the season tickets, which must have cost thousands, in the other. "Well," Nancy prompted, "he's either the most generous man alive or what?" Diane shook her head. "I don't know. Why us? There are thousands